Hi everybody, welcome back to Engine Shop Joe channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Tell your friends about the channel if it will help them. I got a call from the company I used to work for today, and I actually helped them with a problem on a crane. And they told me that they tell people to watch the channel. So does it get any better than that, right? Okay, so today we're going to resume features and parameters. And we're going to start part 2. So the features and parameters are really in two basic parts. The top part, which we discussed, is the header, and the second part is, let's call that the meat of it, is the actual parameters that when you change them, it changes how the engine behaves in the chassis. So part 1, the header we went over. There can be a lot of mistakes in there, and you can still be A-OK. Things will run just fine. Over the years, I have seen mistakes where I remember on an N14, I loaded a 5 1/4 code, and it said 1,000 horsepower up there. And I called the factory and said, does this thing really have 1,000 horsepower? And the guy goes, no, don't worry about that. We've had some problems. And he said, when we do a calibration, we make sure that the part that affects the way the engine runs and behaves is correct. He said that header that just tells you what, it's like an information packet. He said, if we run out of time, he said, that takes the hit. But the actual meat of it that runs the engine is always going to be right. So something you might keep in the back of your head in case you see a wacky number up there or a wrong engine family up there sometime. It's rare, but sometimes that happens. So let's move on to part 2. And here we go. First, some things you need to know. You see up at the top where the green arrow is, it's pointing to features and parameters, and then ECM value and units. That header bar in the Insight program is at the very top, and then as you scroll down, you don't see that again. Now, it used to be that if you were connected to an ECM and you clicked on the features and parameters bar where that arrow was, it would reverse the alphabetical order. And if you clicked over on ECM value, it would order by that column. They were going to do away with that. I don't know if they did or not. But if someone's working on something and they ask you for help and you go over and the alphabetical order of these are backwards, just click up on the features and parameters with the mouse arrow, and that should reorder them. By default, all the parameters are in alphabetical order, A at the top, Z at the bottom. Okay, the second thing you need to know is on the left, there's a blue dotted line going from the top to the bottom. And you can see there's a toolbox on the left of the line, and then there's toolboxes to the right. So they nest the parameters. So as an example, let's go down to where I have the number 2. It says adjust below idle speed, and then there's an adjustment right under there. And then there's a second nesting. You see that other toolbox with the lock? And it says low idle speed, additional settings. And then there's more items under there. And then there's even another toolbox under that that has more choices. Now, if you look over to the right under ECM value, if it says disable, you cannot see the choices that are underneath the toolboxes because you can't change them, so they don't show them to you. If it is enabled, then you will see more choices underneath. So that's the second rule that you need to know. The third thing you need to know is over on the right at the top, it says original value. So when you go in and you change an ECM value, like say you change from disable to enable, or let's say where it says by number 2 low idle speed 700 RPM, and you change it to 650, the old value will appear in the original value column, and it'll appear there until you send the new values to the ECM. Now, once you send them, as long as you don't disconnect Insight and reconnect it to the ECM, you can actually right-click and you'll get a choice that says Restore Original Values. So you can do that. So they added that original value column because people were changing things and then they made mistakes and they didn't know what the old value was. That's really important when we get down into multiplexing, because there can be 30 or 40 choices in multiplexing, and they're not always all the same for the values. So if you get confused and put the wrong value in, now that function is not going to work anymore, and you'll end up with fault codes. All right, so let's get started. Okay, number 1 up there, and I've got those the larger teardrops 1, 2, 3 to kind of get you acclimated to me working in categories, but you'll notice that's always the toolbox farthest to the left, and if there's no toolbox that's any farther to the left than the toolbox we're on, then that is the main category, okay? So first is accelerator interlock, and the accelerator interlock is disabled, usually on trucks, disabled. Where I've seen it enabled is on buses where they have a side door. So if you turn on the interlock, then you have a choice of setting your switch to normally close or normally open. And that just depends on the OEM manufacturer, what switches they use. So if the side door on the bus is open, the driver, if he steps on the throttle, nothing happens till that switch closes. Another one is fire trucks. When I used to work on the big ladder trucks, if you wanted to operate the throttle that's up on the ladder or the throttle on the back of the truck to rev the engine up, you had to have the outriggers all the way out and all the way down to where there was X amount of weight of the truck on those outriggers, and then the remote throttle on the truck would work. Usually on a highway tractor, that's disabled, but that's what that's for. Accelerator options, so you have enable or disable. If this was a chipper instead of a truck, the accelerator might be disabled, and they might be using a speed switch where when they engage the blade on the chipper, the engine just goes right to a certain RPM, maybe 1800 or whatever. So that's why you can disable the accelerator. When you enable the accelerator, there's 7 different accelerator types. That's beyond the scope of this video, but I'll just give you a couple examples. This is dual pulse with modulation. That's what you're going to see on all the newer highway trucks that have the dual pots that have the second pot is typically 50% of the voltage levels that the primary pot is. And that is called a dual pulse with modulation. Modulation simply means that when you push the pedal down or up, those voltages are changing. The ECM watches to see that the voltages stay in a parallel range to each other. And if they fall out of that range, then you'll get a throttle fault and the engine will only idle. Another example is dual pot with idle validation. That would be your old throttle that was in an N14, where you had an idle validation switch that was on or off, and it told the ECM, I am on idle or I am off idle. And then you had the pots that gave you an ohm reading or signal voltage, if you will, so that you could rev the engine up with the throttle pedal. Again, the last time I checked, there were 7 different types. Some of them are very special ones. There's actually one that is with the throttle have to be at 100% to idle, and when it's at 0, the engine's running at full throttle. So that is for a very special situation in a certain type of equipment. And so there's, again, 7 different types. Okay, next, adjustable low idle speed. If you enable that, then the operator in the cab can change the base idle speed. So you can go in and set it to say, here it's set to 700, and then it says low idle speed additional settings, step size 25 RPM. So typically on these trucks, to change idle, you turn the cruise switch off, and then you bump to set or resume. And that's what changes your base idle. And in this case, every time he bumped the switch, he would change the RPM, 25 RPM. Typically, base idle is 600 or 650 to 800 RPM. I've never seen one over 800 RPM. I've never seen one under 600. And then there's a feature called save idle speed on power down. If that was enabled and the operator, say the operator changed it to 750 RPM, when he shut the engine off, it would lock low idle speed at 750 unless he changed it again. If somebody comes into your shop and says, hey, my idle speed is like at 800 or at 600, and I don't know what happened. What happened was they had the cruise switch turned off, didn't realize it, reached down and bumped set or resume, especially on the steering wheel buttons, and adjustable low idle speed was enabled, and they were changing their idle speed and had no idea they were doing it. So if that happens, explain it to the driver. It becomes a problem. Just set it to what he wants and then disable adjustable low idle speed. Low idle speed adjustment switch, enable. That just tells the ECM, look for a switch input. The next one is after treatment. I think we're going to stop here and we'll start after treatment next week because we're already at 12 minutes. Thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe. See you next week.